Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to go and try and keep my remarks brief, as I don't want to repeat all of the comments made by many colleagues this afternoon. But I would like to echo some of the points that have been made by a number of honourable members. And that's particularly around people that are pointing out that we've been waiting for this strategy for far, far too long. The government promised in 2015 to enshrine rights for victims in law, and 3 years later, and the government is still not announcing primary legislation, but instead another consultation, which we are told to expect sometime next year. More than 3 years to achieve this is just quite frankly not good enough. And I know from people in my constituency about their issues as victims struggling to navigate the criminal justice system. They've suffered delays in responses, a lack of communication, and even finding out offenders have been released without their knowledge. A survivor of sexual assault from my constituency told me that she felt punished by the system. After being raped, she had to wait months before her case was sent to the CPS. There were delays in the case, and during that time, the rapist had been accused of sexually assaulting someone else. More delays took place whilst the CPS decided if the cases would be tried separately, together, or at all. She then found out that some of her evidence was lost by the police, creating yet more delays. Following all of this pressure, she developed post-traumatic stress disorder and had to take a lot of time off work, hugely impacting on her career. Until the case is closed, it is impossible for her to move on with her recovery. Every time she has to deal with the police, it triggers her post-traumatic stress disorder. The experience many victims have of the criminal justice system is frankly disgraceful. We need a victims' law with teeth. I'm concerned that without huge changes across government, the experience victims have of the criminal justice system will not get better. How can the government seriously improve the experience of victims whilst also slashing funding for legal aid and cutting police budgets? In the last year, 21,000 police officers have been axed across the country. Police forces are stretched, and the number of cases that are closed without being resolved keeps increasing. This year, the number of rape cases resulting in a conviction was the lowest in a decade, and the CPS was criticised for dropping cases despite strong evidence. And it's no surprise that many victims are left wondering whether they should have even bothered reporting something to begin with. In my constituency, I know members of my community who've been reluctant to speak to the police in the wake of violent crimes. Witnesses worry about their safety when speaking out, especially in areas where trust with the police is low. I'm thinking of one family in particular, my constituent Sharon, whose son was murdered 3 years ago. Sharon never felt supported by the judicial system. There was no emotional or practical support. When her son's case went to retrial, Sharon had to go through the pain of reliving her ordeal over and over again. But if justice had been served, she's gone and said that it would have been worthwhile. But at the end of the retrial, the case was never closed with any convictions. The lack of a conviction has been devastating for Sharon and her family, but it's also had a huge impact on the wider community. When cases like this are left unresolved, it can damage a community's faith in the criminal justice system, and it makes it less likely for witnesses to come forward in the future. Right, then there are cuts to legal aid. The number of people standing up in court with no legal advice or representation has risen unacceptably under this government. Last year, 2 out of 3 people appearing in court had no legal representation whatsoever, and this is shameful. One family in my constituency resorted to crowdfunding for legal fees after their daughter died in care of a private mental health clinic. Her family want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, but they had no automatic right to legal aid for an inquest. They met obstacles at every single stage. Reviews were cancelled at the last moment. The coroner was dismissive and aggressive to them on the phone. They had to fight for a judicial review to replace the coroner, which would not have been possible without crowdfunding yet again from the public. And I do agree with the honourable member from Walsall North who went and said that it's great that people go and give in terms of crowdfunding, but we shouldn't always have to go and rely on that. Access to justice must be a fundamental democratic right. Instead, we've reached a point where justice is for those that are lucky enough to afford it. For all those families that have been impacted in Lewisham, Deptford and across the country, we must have a victims law as soon as possible. They shouldn't have to wait any longer.